Hello and welcome to the FigBytes podcast, the sustainable leading edge, where we explore how business can be the driver for the shift to a net positive, regenerative and inclusive economy and society we're required to recognize the changes we want to see in the world. And today's guest is Peter Kelly, Group Director of Sustainable Operations. Welcome to the podcast, Pete. Nice to see you again, and thanks for joining us today.
Oh, pleasure.
So it would be so nice to hear about your own personal sustainability journey and how did you get to the role that you're in today and what is your role about?
Oh, okay. Thanks, Zita. So I had a natural love of the outdoor life. When I was younger, I spent a lot of time on my bike out in woodlands and cubs and scouts and loved the outdoor life, camping and that kind of thing. That led to a natural affinity with geography. So I studied GCSE and A-level geography, and then decided that I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my career. So I thought, well, I enjoy geography, so I'm going to do a geography degree. While I was doing my A-levels, I also worked in Waitrose, but I didn't particularly like being told what to do. I'm not very good at being told what to do by anybody, including my own parents. So I decided, I had a good friend who worked on a construction site, and he said, "Oh, come and work with me, labouring. You get treated like a man on site." So I thought I'd give that a go, and I think the first day they nearly broke me on site. I think they gave me a particularly really difficult job to do, a really physically taxing job, and to test me out, I think, just to see whether I was up for the challenge or not. But I must admit, the following morning I did seriously think of staying in bed, but I thought, no, I'll get up determined to give it another shot. And it got easier and easier, and it was only to earn money, really. So I had some pocket money coming in while I was doing my A-levels. And I really enjoyed it. I love being outside. I love the camaraderie and the crack, as we call it, with the guys on site and girls. So I did that for quite a long time. I did that all the way through my university, all the summers, all the holidays. I just gave this particular company called Getjar, a concrete contracting firm in central London, and yeah, they gave me a job basically. And then I left university, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do either. So I thought, why not go traveling? So again, I went back and worked and saved up the money on a construction site. And then when I returned from traveling, I thought, well, I've really got to get a career now. So I actually went to work for Multiplex at Wembley Stadium, which is my first kind of major contracting job, very different to working for a subcontractor. And once that job was closing in on an end date, I applied, funnily enough, to be a construction manager at a lot of the different major contractors. But Saurabh McAlpine responded and said, actually, with your geography background and your construction experience, would you be interested in joining our environmental management team? And I was like, wow, you can do environmental management as a career? Like, I never expected that. So I thought, wow, this is too good of an opportunity to turn down. So yeah, I accepted a job with Saurabh McAlpine and started the best part of 18 years ago, looking at environmental management systems, developing ISO standards, doing site inspections, traveling across the UK.
All the fun stuff.
Oh, I loved it. I love being out on site. I love meeting different people. I love traveling across the country. I got to go to places I'd never been to before in Scotland and Wales and Newcastle and Liverpool, all sorts of places that I'd never actually been to before. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. And then the rest, they say, is history.
And now you're group director. How are you doing the day-to-day as a group director at ISG?
Yeah, it's been great. I've really enjoyed the challenge. I started at ISG as a regional sustainability manager, and in the construction London region, very at home there, very comfort zone. But then stretched my wings a little bit and moved into the fit out and then the engineering services businesses, and eventually at a group level, and then eventually into this role. And I've really enjoyed it. It's been very different to an operational role. It's very strategic. It's very stakeholder management focused in terms of managing up as well as laterally, so not just across the enabling departments and the managing directors, but also up to the stat board. And then, of course, operationally managing what's now quite a large team across the different business units. So it's very self-motivating, and you have to be self-motivated. You don't get a huge amount of direction as you'd probably expect when you're a bit more junior, so you have to set your own agenda. And I've really relished that and really enjoyed that, and that strategic piece is, to be honest, always where I wanted to get to, and I'm just very lucky that I've managed to achieve that at ISG.
That actually leads me to a question that I was going to ask you later on. But how do you actually build that buy-in with those stakeholders, if you're looking up or down within the organization and outside as a supply chain, for example?
I think when you're starting off more junior, it's very quid pro quo. It's like, I'll do something for you if you do something for me. And I always say to people don't buy into anything, doesn't matter what it is, not just sustainability. They buy into you. They want to do something because you've got a rapport, a relationship with them. So, and it's the same throughout your career. You have to build relationships, and you have to understand what makes different people tick, and what their wants and desires and needs are, and then you have to cater your message to what's concerning them, what's their stay awakes, what's their major agenda item, and how can you align what you need to achieve with what they need to achieve, whether that's the managing director that has to win work, and how sustainability can therefore help us win work with some clients, etc. So you have to find not necessarily the altruistic nature of sustainability in people. You have to find how you can link it to their goals and their aspirations, and then build a relationship. And I often find breaking bread with people, having lunch, really breaks down barriers, evening meals, drinks. So it won't be a big surprise to I'm a really big advocate of socializing and breaking those barriers down and getting to know somebody properly, so you can remember and say, oh, how's your how's little Johnny, or he wasn't too well last time we spoke, how are they, and people remember that you've made the effort to remember what's going on in their lives, and that just helps you with relationship building, and then getting your message across, and people buy into you.
That's actually a good advice, probably for people who are actually just starting their sustainability journey. And I was going to ask you on a couple of things, like what would be your advice to those organizations who are at the very beginning in their baby steps, and what can they learn about the efforts that ISG has been achieving and putting in?
I think the crucial thing to any business is understanding what your impact is. If you're clear on what impact you have, then you can do something about it. And different business service lines have very, very different impacts, whether it's insurance or law or construction or tech. Whatever the industry you're in has very, very different environmental, social, governance, sustainability, whatever you want to call it, impact on the planet, on the people, etc. So if you can understand, whether that's through data or some expertise or some expert advice, what that impact is, then you can do something about it. And always start small, build on it, find the low-hanging fruit, deal with those first, show some traction, build on that, and communicate. Communication is so important in terms of those success stories, and what wasn't successful. I think people learn more from what wasn't successful, and nobody's good at sharing that. But if you can share that internally, at least that will help you get traction.
And I think that's also leading me to the next topic, which is I'm very curious, how do you feel the industry or the sustainability space changed since you first started in the environmental manager role? Because even in my past 5 years, I can sense such, massive changes and shift in mindset towards sustainability. But for someone who's been in it from a bit longer than I have, you must have seen massive changes.
Huge, enormous. And I think the biggest change more recently is that this change has lasted. We've seen interest in our subject in the past, but as soon as a financial crash or the economy tanks or what have you, then it seems to dissipate fairly quickly. I was, if I'm honest, really worried about that with COVID, but if anything, I think that the sheer public understanding of what's going on with the climate crisis has meant that is not the case. But certainly when I started, it was very environmentally risk focused. It was legislative focused, so very much making sure that we didn't breach legislation environmentally, and very risk focused rather than doing anything above and beyond. It was the BREEAM, very basic BREEAM and environmental compliance. That's changed. I think that changed over time to understanding environmental impact, not quite to this extent we see today, but certainly around construction impacts like waste has always been a big part of what we do. Water, biodiversity, etc. All of those things are very environmentally focused. Carbon has dominated more recently, and now you see the evolution into circular economy, a much bigger focus on social value, and of course the G part of ESG, the governance side. So it's been a huge evolution, and the other positive is it's taking in a much wider breadth of enabling departments. So the whole ESG piece has meant that we're working much more closely with our HR, health and safety, supply chain, governance teams than we ever were before in terms of that reporting and global reporting initiative, etc. So it's touching all parts of the business now in a way that it never has before, and people understand the importance of it, not just for our clients, for ourselves, but also for attraction and retention of our talent. So yeah, it's here to stay. Finally, I think we can say, and that's really great for anybody in our career at this moment in time.
I couldn't agree more, and fingers crossed. I know you joined ISG quite a few years ago, so it would be interesting to hear that when that kind of the new sustainability program started and the things that you took on as a high-level director, what were the challenges that you didn't really expect to to kind of get in your way?
Well, I think it all usually comes back to people, doesn't it? It's not so much the strategy side of it. It comes back to the people piece. So we know, I think most people of my generation, with my experience, know what we need to do to decarbonize, introduce circularity, improve social value, be more governance orientated. The basics have been there for some time. We've drawn those together, I think, now into some really clear delivery plans. The investment side of it is going to be a challenge in terms of really pushing. This is going to take some investment to look at the R&D side of it, which as an industry we're not great at in construction. And then it's been the challenges around people management. As always, you know, you've got especially in sustainability, where staff have become very valuable, not just in our industry but across all industries now. It's very hard to get people that have more than maybe 10 years experience, because as we know, there wasn't such a great call for it 10 years ago. So there's a big challenge around that management of talent and the pool of excellent people we've got working for us, and others that I know work across the industry. So as always, people are the challenge, not so much the strategic piece. I think we know what to deliver. We need to get that through business planning, where the cost and resource is always a challenge, but there's always compromise there, and that's how you run a business. It's the people management side of it that's always the challenge. Especially I didn't expect that to be such a big challenge. I thought it would get easier as you get older and more experienced and you rise up the ladder, but if anything, it becomes more difficult.
Well, that's kind of an advice, I guess, for others who aspire to get to your level and know how much responsibility it might come with as well, and having to try to retain that talent. And I can see, you know, from the job market that sustainability and environmental management has become I don't want to call it popular, but it's very important. So we are well needed, which is a nice thing to have, not necessarily a good thing for yourself if you want to retain good stuff. But of course, people can choose to work for the organizations that they agree with and, they morally want to support and the cause they are fighting for.
Yeah, I think there's a challenge around, particularly in sustainability. We tend to be maybe not quite as red in the wheel of the personalities of those we work with in construction. So you have to dial up your ability to have those difficult conversations, to tell somebody to cool your jets, that your time will come, you're running before you can walk. All those very difficult conversations when you're managing people that perhaps they don't want to hear, and they just want to be my job in 2 years' time and all the rest of it. So there's a lot of difficult conversations, and managing that with people, it has been a real challenge, and something I've had to come out of my comfort zone from a naturally more introverted green side person, to have those awkward, difficult conversations face to face in a room is a skill that you desperately and definitely need when you get to my level, because you'd be surprised how often you have to have them. So, and that, as I mentioned, that's managing up, that's managing laterally and managing down. Those difficult conversations are a skill that you quickly learn.
And when it comes to, and I know ISG has been working with its supply chain to come up with kind of new solutions and more carbon friendly, environmentally friendly solutions to build with, and how we manage our operations. And how did you find engaging the supply chain? I know it's not necessarily personally your role, but you have worked with them a lot from memory. So it would be interesting to hear your opinion on how that was like in the beginning and how it has evolved since.
Yeah, I think our supply chain are waking up to the fact that there's greater communication between us and them understanding what our clients want. So not just we are their client and what we want, but why, the reason why. We're not asking for this stuff just to make their lives difficult or cost them money or add program. We're asking it because of our own clients and what we want to achieve and what our clients want to achieve in this space. So I think there's a greater understanding of the why of it all when it comes to sustainability. I think there's a real cross section. You've got the very small number of companies in our supply chain that are really at the leading edge, and some of them are further ahead than us. Then you've got the people that are coming in behind, and then you've got the laggers at the end, that classic curve. So there's a lot to be done. We've rationalized our supply chain into a much more bite-sized capability around our preferred supply chain members, which obviously we'll tackle first. They do 80% of our work, and then we'll move on to the smaller contractors. We've done a lot of training with them through the Supply Chain Sustainability School, and I'm sure they've done that with other contractors as well. So it's not particularly new to them, but it's certainly helped them, that why piece, why we are asking for some of this stuff. I think going forward, we'll look to be a bit more innovative, and we've got an innovation process now that we're pretty happy with at ISG. So there's an ability for not just our supply chain, but our manufacturers that we work closely with also to start coming to the party in terms of their R&D, what they're working on, how they can lower embodied carbon materials, whatever it is, they can bring that to the party. So there's going to be more in this space, and potential for us to invest as well, where potentially we won't offset, and we'll help our supply chain to decarbonize and use that as a potential way of showing how we're reducing our emissions. So lots of ideas flying around, lots more engagement to be had. I think they're very open to what we're asking of them, but you may be aware, but the current climate is quite challenging here in the economy, so we have to be mindful of that. They are largely SMEs, and need to keep the lights on and keep everybody paid at the minute. So I'm sure by the time the economy settles down next year and the year after, we'll be able to really push forward. And this year is mostly about us getting our house in order anyway. But we've got some big plans, and we're really looking forward to collaboration, because that's the only way we're going to deliver any of this, really.
And when we are not specifically thinking about the E, but more the S and the G, how do you see the supply chain, if they have been improving, and what are the initiatives that you would be working on when it comes to the social and governance side of things with supply chain?
I'm always really jealous of social value, to be honest, because it's so tangible. They can see social value in practice when they employ an apprentice, or they, our supply chain do massive amounts of social value. They just don't call it that. They probably do more than we do if you added it all up across our supply chain. They do all sorts of boxing matches in their local community and teach boxing, and incredible amount of work goes on in their local communities to support young people, etc. So they do a huge amount. So asking them to do social value, I don't think is a huge ask of them. They're usually keen to support in any way they can, really, and whether that's the traditional charity fundraising, or is it the physical works of donating materials or physical works for some charity, through to the supply chain, to the staff and taking on apprentices, etc. So I think there's plenty that they do already in that space. The governance stuff is, I wouldn't say a challenge, but it's that transparency piece, I think, in the industry that's going to be a tough nut to crack. At least initially, it's going to be that collation of data, the ability to be very transparent about how we're doing in ESG, and the governance side of it, in terms of that being able to show and have the evidence for that governance piece. I think there's going to be a culture change, but something, again, it's nothing that they shouldn't be already doing anyway. It's just a case of how understanding that it needs to be a more collaborative process rather than a closed book process.
Do you feel like that the changing kind of policies and governance space is affecting like your decision making as well as the supply chain that you're working with?
Not at the minute, if I'm brutally honest. I don't think we've got there yet. I mentioned earlier that we're setting ourselves up for success this year, and we're putting a lot of the policies and plans and thinking into practice, largely to go forward next year.
And also when it comes to, obviously we have talked about the E side of things already, but apart from the obvious and reducing our carbon footprint, what do you think we need to focus on more to address the climate crisis?
Well, there's a couple of huge things. I mean, I'm passionate about circularity, but even before you think of circularity, the whole biodiversity crisis is as big, if not bigger, than the carbon crisis. So I think there's a huge element to that in construction that perhaps we're not as au fait with as we need to be, about where our materials come from, where they're sourced from, and what impact that sourcing has in the environments with which we retrieve those materials from. So I think that biodiversity crisis is enormous, possibly even more challenging, or as challenging as the climate crisis. So that would be number one. The circularity piece is something I'm very passionate about. Waste is waste. It's a ridiculous throwaway culture that we have, and we need to dramatically change to have a much more circular economy, where everything goes round and round in terms of reuse, and we're doing our bit in terms of construction, but a lot more needs to be done. So I call it the post-consumer materials are the real challenge. It's the materials that have been used already, whether that's in a building, a fit out, or whatever it is, whatever type of building it is. It's getting those materials out and reusing them, or remanufacturing them into something else. That's the challenge, rather than the recycling that goes on at the minute, which I'm sure uses a lot of energy. So that would be one. I think water and water footprinting is also going to be a huge challenge, given the climate crisis, obviously, and the amount of dry weather we're having. So I think water footprinting as well is the third challenge. So nothing easy there. Becoming a more circular economy, water footprinting, understanding the impact of your materials, etc., and construction on water, and then the materials resourcing in terms of biodiversity and etc. They're the three huge challenges I think we need to tackle alongside the climate crisis.
Yeah, it's interesting from my side, speaking to companies from various different sides of the world, rather than, I used to be very much EU, UK focused, and it's very interesting to see how the whole carbon focus is slowly starting to realize the need for, better water management and managing water scarcity and the biodiversity. But there's so many decisions and policies had to be created for it to kick in, as much as carbon has been around and, leading the way strongly. And actually, I'm very interested to hear what is a commonly held belief about the sustainability space that you passionately disagree with?
Oh, that's a very good question. Wow, I have to take a minute to think about
I have a
that.
feeling you have one or more than one.
I think the biggest one is around cost. It's got to be around cost. I think there's a very common misconception that sustainability costs more, and I think it's a lazy argument. So that definitely I feel passionately about is can be dispelled quite straightforwardly. If you plan for sustainability in whatever you do, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you plan correctly for whatever you're trying to achieve, whether it's lower carbon or more circularity or biodiversity, whatever it might be, if you take that into consideration from the start all the way through your process, then there's no reason why. There might be some investment required, but that will be required for any other product or service line that you want to introduce. But it shouldn't be more long term a much more cost. And I think it's been proved several times that those that focus on ESG make more profit. So that's certainly why it's not the main reason, but it's certainly one of the reasons our board are so interested in ESG, because they believe there'll be a return on that investment, that ability to attract and retain talent, that ability to win work, etc. So that would be my first one, is sustainability shouldn't cost more. It might cost a bit of investment money, depending on what you're trying to achieve, but there will be a return if you do it properly.
I think working within the industry, as well as like having to have those business cases in place to get that buy-in, was definitely a challenge, but it's good to hear that now it's becoming more easier to get that resource and buy-in from your management and your board as well, to have those programs in place.
Yeah, I think it is a challenge. I was talking to a colleague in one of our sister companies today, and showing that return on investment on sustainability can be difficult over 10, 15, 20 years, etc. So, I think we could all improve our commercial skills and understand commerciality of the world we work in. And again, as a director, you have to be able to do that. You can't just, go for the utopia. It has to be based in a return. So I think if people can understand that, and we're here to make profit as well as look after the planet, there wouldn't be any businesses if we didn't make profit. It's just how you make that profit you can influence. So I think the commerciality side of it is really, really important, and I think that's an important skill to learn throughout your career is a business case and how you put that together, and return on investment, basic skills like that. But certainly those that use that easy, lazy excuse that it costs more, I don't believe know what they're talking about, or haven't done enough research to prove whether that's the case or not.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, actually. Doing those exercises myself, I think it's so obvious that you will get better as a business if you improve your ESG practices. And when it comes to like innovation in the industry and all the like new coming requirements, what are those kind of resources that you rely on? I know you network a lot, but in terms of like ESG and sustainability resources that you keep yourself informed with?
Yeah, it's another good question. I think you've hit the nail on the head with networking. It's largely transmission of information from internal colleague to internal colleague and external colleague to external colleague. So a very brief example is some regulations coming in. Well, it's not really regulations, it's a change of practice by the Environment Agency that was recently sent round by a colleague who works for weights. And is everybody aware of this? This is the potential implications, etc. So it's 9 times out of 10, that's how it works. It's somebody sends something, and it could be anything. It could be a Guardian article, a Times article. It could be a sustainability publication. It could be a construction publication, building magazine, or what have you. I genuinely should make more time to read, and that is one of my personal goals this year. I don't mean books, because I read on the tube. I mean actual sustainability orientated information. I read the articles that get sent, but I don't always get the time to go looking for stuff unless there's something very specific I need to research. So yeah, I acknowledge that unless it's like circular economy and construction report that I have to read or something like that, I need to do more of having setting this time aside, I think, to read around the subject a lot more, definitely.
Do you feel like that content is available in a simple space rather than you having to like cherry pick from here and there or receiving information? Do you feel like there's kind of a challenge to get that information and the right information to your way?
I don't think it's all in one place. It depends what you're looking for, really. So for construction, the UK GBC put out very good end of week communications. That's the UK Green Building Council. BizNow put out some good stuff as well. And then there's the wider aspect of you know, not just in construction and what other industries are up to, etc. And funnily enough, you tend to get sent a lot more of the bad stories often than the good stories. I'm sure you've probably heard about all the recent shenanigans with offsetting, and of course everyone's like sending around articles about the companies that have potentially been caught out by offsetting. So yeah, it's interesting when something goes wrong, they fly as quicker around than the good stories. But yeah, I don't think there's one place I would say I go to. I think but the information you like is or want is readily available. It's just not all in one place, I wouldn't have said.
Yeah, it's interesting how you mentioned offsetting and how I started in my role 8-10 months ago. I'm just looking at the calendar, and even then people were asking more about offsetting, and it's becoming less and less because clearly there has been, even around ESG, like the term ESG becoming a bit more, we shouldn't rely on that specific term. So it's interesting how those can really affect the processes people put in place and how they actually think about their own like ESG or sustainability journey. And you really need to like make sure how you actually even phrase things. It might be the same exact thing, but it might give a very different message to someone who wants to take that on board.
Yeah,
And
we don't help ourselves with acronyms and all the rest of it in terminology that's quite fluently used. So yeah, I totally agree.
I mean, remembering all the acronyms from construction took me a few years to get my head around those. So last but not least, and I'm keeping an eye on the clock as well, what makes you feel optimistic about the current sustainability climate and what's coming next?
I'm really optimistic. I think there's never been more companies, more drive, more public awareness, more youth movement around the climate crisis and everything that we've discussed today. So I'm hopeful for governmental change in terms of how they treat sustainability. So I think, again, I'm more hopeful that that will help to drive further change. But a lot of the big companies are on this journey anyway. The alignment of the ESG standards that's going on at the minute, some of the legislation that's coming out of Europe around reporting of impact, etc. So yeah, I've never been more optimistic. If he'd asked me when I started my career, I would have been like, oh well, yeah, it's a lot of compliance going on here and not a lot of impact reduction. But I genuinely feel that there's never been a better time to be in sustainability, because you can finally get some traction to reduce our impact as a business, not just individually or by individual projects or business units or individuals that have done good stuff. I want to hand on heart record in my annual report for next year that ISG as a business has achieved this, this, and this everywhere across the business, and that's my simple goal for this year, is to roll out some initiatives that we can hand on heart say ISG has delivered. And I think if every business did that, then we'd make a huge difference. So yeah, I've never been more optimistic. I think there's some game-changing technology will come. You know, there's a lot of talk about hydrogen and the mix between hydrogen and hybrid with electricity. So yeah, I think we will get there. The cost of renewables dropping dramatically. There's so much to be optimistic about. I think we've got a long way to go, and I'd rather we did it a lot quicker. But I certainly think that the momentum is the word I was looking for, is never been greater, and I think that will only increase.
And I think seeing the results of that hard work became a bit quicker with all that provided, like technology and the ability to put those resources in and make those changes. Whereas back in the day, you may have to wait longer for kind of a result that you want to see. And I guess that also influenced the decision makers. They didn't get that like instant results, so they wouldn't think they should invest resource into that project, for example.
Yeah. I also think that the greenwashing piece is really coming to the fore finally. So companies are being held to account by what they're actually putting out into the public domain, but whether that's actually tangible, true, has evidence behind it. And so I think that's also going to scare a lot of companies into the bandwagon jumping. Will be, if we're going to do this, we're going to have to do this properly. So that's, I think, a huge momentum change as well, is that people have got their fingers burnt in terms of saying stuff they haven't actually or aren't going to achieve. So I think that will also help to drive forward change that we need to see.
Thank you so much for your thoughts today and sharing all your lovely experience. And I remember the times when we worked together, and I remember dearly. And thanks again for joining and sharing all of this with our listeners. And this was the Sustainable Leading Edge podcast with Peter Kelly. And see you next time.
Thank you so much, Zita. I loved it. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.